Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to KEI. I'm Kathleen Stevens, the president of KEI, the Korea Economic Institute. And it's my great pleasure to say it's great to see you in person. For those of you here in person, it's wonderful to welcome our other guests who are joining us online for Korean American Day, January 13th. And I believe this is the 18th Korean American Day. The day, every day is Korean American Day here at KEI. This is the 18th year that we have marked the day proclaimed by the U.S. Congress in 2005. I'm not sure, well, I do know why they picked January 13th. I'm supposed to say that. It's because I think as many of you know, that is the date when about 100 intrepid Koreans arrived in Hawaii on a small ship to work in the agricultural fields of Hawaii, went on to do many other things, but that is what we mark as the first group of Korean immigrants arriving in the United States in Hawaii in 2003. A lot has changed since then, and that's kind of what we talk about today and on Korean American Day. And of course, we also see Korean American Day in the context of the broader U.S. Korea relationship, which is its own story and goes back even further to 1880, well, even further than that, but 1882 with the establishment of diplomatic relations between the United States and at that time the Korean Kingdom of Korea. And there's a lot of interesting historical stuff about that. For those of you who haven't been to the Legation House at Logan Circle, another interesting story. I mention all that because I've been struck by people talking about, you're going to think I'm never going to give you our panel a chance to talk, but I always have a few things to say about this. I was helped by a piece I read that talked about Korean immigration in the United States is falling into kind of three stages. With that first stage being, of course, the arrival of the group of immigrants in Hawaii and others that followed. Rather paradoxically, but importantly and tragically, historically, arriving because of a need for laborers after the Chinese Exclusion Act of the late 19th century. Korean workers arriving to work in the United States. But even in that early time, of course, there were many Koreans we remember, very few in number, who came to the United States as the really pioneering students, diplomats, and others to establish this relationship. And I think of names like Philip J. Son, who actually, I believe, was the first Korean to be naturalized as a U.S. citizen. That was in the 19th century. Syngman Rhee, of course. Young-Il Kang, who wrote a couple of my favorite books in English about Korea and about the United States. And An Hee, who wrote the beautiful melody, which is the Korean national anthem. So that first era was a very rich era, but also a very limited one in terms of broad immigration in the United States. The second one, of course, occurring in the context of the Korean War and the Koreans who immigrated to the United States as spouses of American servicemen, as orphans coming out of the Korean War. And the real period of modern immigration, which I think you're kind of focusing on today, we often mark from 1964 when the U.S. Immigration Act changed. We actually had immigration reform once before in America, several times, maybe we'll have it again. But this was one that really did allow Koreans and others to bring their families, their skills, their ambitions, their hopes to the United States, and started what now is a community, of course, and a very diverse and accomplished community that's numbered about 2 million people. And when you think that the number in 1970, which for some of us is not so long ago, I actually remember it, Korean Americans in the United States numbered about 70,000. 70,000. So from 70,000 to 2 million. And all the numbers, all the graphs that have to do with Korea go like this, the economy. But really, it's just a reflection of what we're talking about today has all happened, and a lot has happened in a very, very short period of time. So, of course, Korean Americans today are not only more numerous, they're also more visible in every occupation, in every part of the United States. Wherever I go in the U.S. now, I can play a game of, I'm going to find something having to do with Korea. And that can be a person, but it can also be a course. Now, the ubiquitous gochujang or whatever else we can find in the markets. But certainly the Korean community is broader and more active than ever. And we're going to talk about that today. We did celebrate, of course, in 2018, 4 members of Congress coming from Korean American backgrounds. And if I got this right, we have the experts, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, representing 2 coasts, up and down, and very different. Again, I think reflecting the diversity of the community itself. And we could go on with many more examples, but I think we'll hear some today. KEI here in Washington, which has been dedicated for 40 years to deepening the understanding of the relationship with the United States and Korea, has really tried to use this occasion every year for the last 16 years to highlight the lives and contributions of Korean Americans. A little later on today, if not here already, we're going to have someone we recognized a few years ago in 2013, Eugene Cho, the founder of One Day's Wages. I'm just mentioning it because it still seems very relevant. I guess it is because it's coming from the White House today. It's a grassroots movement, people's stories and actions to alleviate global poverty. But if you look at the KEI website, you'll see that every year we've tried to look at an area, some activities to highlight some individuals who do represent the kind of engagement and participation of the Korean American community across the range of issues in the United States and the world. So with that, I'm going to turn over to our panel today. We are so pleased, as we gather today, to really, this year, and also as we come back to an in-person format, as well as online format, we want to think about the Korean American community kind of more broadly, and kind of where is it going, where has it been, I almost said we, I guess I did, but where are we collectively going? We have 2 perfect people here to do that. Dr. Abraham Kim, who is, I hope he doesn't mind my saying, a distinguished alumni of KEI, who contributed so much to getting all this started, and the Mansfield Center in Montana, now the Executive Director of the Council of Korean Americans, and Mr. Wonseok Song, the founder and Executive Director of the Korean American Grassroots Conference. And we have our own Director of Communications, Sang Kim, here to lead the discussion. So again, welcome to both of you. Thank you for coming today. Thank all of you for coming. I do think that having Korean American Day is on January 13th is the perfect timing for being right between 2 New Years that we all get to celebrate if we're part of the Korean American community. So I say to all of you, 새해 복 많이 받으세요, and I look forward to working together with you this year. Sang, over to you.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Stevens, for a great introduction, and also always for your support for Korean American Day and your leadership. Welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. Good to see everyone in person. Thank you so much for spending your Friday with us, and then also welcome to everyone those are watching online. My name is Sang Kim, Director of Communications at KEI. And as Ambassador Stevens mentioned, we've been celebrating Korean American Day for many years. And as a Korean American myself, it's always exciting and inspiring to see so many Korean American leaders and doing great things in so many different areas. And as we reflect on the 120 years of Korean immigration, I am very grateful for all the previous generations that have paved the way to make things a little bit easier for everyone. And I also know there are a lot of things that the current generation, and including the 2 distinguished speakers we have today, that are doing to make things even easier and better for the next generation. So I'm very excited to moderate this panel with Dr. Abraham Kim and also Mr. Wonseok Song. Thank you so much for being part of our event, and happy Korean American Day.
Happy Korean American Day.
All right. So this week in DC, and I'm sure there are other places across the country that are celebrating the Korean American Day event. And I thought it would be a great way for us to end the week and end the Korean American Day talking about some of the not only the achievements, but also some of the challenges that we're facing today and the areas that we can improve for even better for the future. So to get the conversation going, I do want to talk about the achievements. So what do you think is the most important achievements / important accomplishment that Korean Americans have accomplished in the past 120 years?
I'll kick it off. Well, first of all, thank you very much for this kind invitation. And yes, I am a distinguished alum of KEI, and I used to be organizing these things. So it's interesting how the world goes in circles, right? So thank you very much for allowing me to speak today. I think, we can talk about how the Korean American community has really gained in great visibility. I think, if you think about it, we're about a group of 2 million people, and in a country that is about 332 million. So that's about 0.6% of the population. Not a very large part of the population. And yet Korean Americans have, most recently, within the last 10, 15 years, have taken on areas of great visibility and leadership, right? If you take a look at some of the things like Ambassador Stevens mentioned, we have 4 Congress representatives, but in the private sector too, as well. I think if you look at in the financial services industry, people like Joe Bae, who's the co-CEO of KKR, one of the largest private equity, until recently, Kyu-Sung Lee was a CEO of a Carlyle Group. In media, yesterday at our event, we honored COO of NPR, Will Lee's Korean American, and there was a recent announcement of Catherine Kim, who's the Senior Vice President of All NBC Editorial. So there are people in the Korean American community that have taken greater leadership role in not only public sector, but also private sector. So I think that's one of the, at least visibly for the public, that's one of the big accomplishments. But I think, but a second point I wanted to just to make quickly here, and we can talk about it more deeply in our conversation, is that it's not just about the accomplishments, but I think it's about the Korean American culture and identity. I think that's a big accomplishment because, you know, if you think about it, and if you talk to many Korean Americans don't feel like they fit in mainstream Korean culture or mainstream American culture. We're kind of a third culture, right? Mm-hmm. And I call it the kimchi taco generation because we are a blend of our Korean values and heritage that we grew up in, but also it's been shaped by that immigrant experience, right? And things that Koreans living in Korea have not experienced. So things like just the whole immigrant experience, being a minority, growing up in a society that, you know, when I was growing up here, there was a little bit of kind of embarrassment and shame being Korean American because we were teased as you know, as that Asian, or the question you get, I'm from Korea. It started with, where's Korea? And then it went to, are you from the north or the south, right? So those kinds of narrative and experience have shaped the Korean American psyche, which created a new identity and experience. So I think creating that unique culture that's uniquely Korean American is a very big accomplishment, and something that we all resonate and connect with, which is I think a wonderful achievement, and it's growing and it's dynamic. And so, and again, we can talk about that in greater detail later on, but I think, of course, all the accomplished people, but this incredible community that's dynamic and it's unique here to the United States is a great accomplishment. So, over to you, Mr. Song.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting me, because I'm not sure, you know, I'm pretty much I'm enough qualified to represent Korean American community, but you know, I have a background to do civic engagement, advocate Korean Americans, community toward the capital the past 10 years. So, I try to bring more perspective on civic engagement wise. Mm-hmm. So for me, our great achievement for the past 102 years, 120 years is we have 4 Congress members. Mm-hmm. Not only 4 Congress members in the Capitol Hill, but also we just have our organization has hosted Korean American Day reception for the congressional staffers yesterday, mm-hmm. and we have more than 100 congressional staffers who's been working closely with the Korean American community or U.S. Korea relations, and among them we have 60 Korean American congressional staffers. Mm-hmm. But civic engagement, the area is probably, we need to go far more, need to make that more, but still, I'm really proud of we have 4 Congress members and 60 congressional staffers, and not only but that, these days the Korean Americans community start to engage in mainstream legislative process too, right? Mm-hmm. So, people record like comfort women resolution back in 2007, and then even though we failed to pass the bill last session, 117 session for the Adopted Citizenship Act, which is like, give it the citizenship to the inter-country adoptees who doesn't have a citizenship. The most most population impacted adoptees, half of them, about like 20,000 adoptees are Korean American adoptees, right? So those the legislative process, so we can actively engage in, that we advocate our community. That's like a big achievement. Again, also I can say the Korean American business sector's achievement too. Almost every year, if you go to big town, now you can see the H mark, right? Mm-hmm. And then I want to describe the Korean company, global company, as a Korean American company, because even though they're running by the Korean headquarters, but still they register as like American corporation, right? Mm-hmm. The Hyundai Motors America in Alabama, the Kia in Georgia. After they built it in their factory in there, the mainstream U.S. people treated the Korean American community is totally different, mm-hmm. right? We Korean American business create the employment opportunity and generate the revenue at their the communities. So I can say those our economic achievement and the people who are in the Capitol Hill as a Korean American represent Korean American community. That could be one of the big achievements for mm-hmm. us.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only the politicians, but also community leaders that we see on a higher level. But I also like seeing Korean Americans in everyday lives, so whether they're police officers, firefighters, and we're all part of the community that we're seeing in a society. And I want to talk about the word Korean American for a second. Of course, we're talking about Korean American as community as a collective group today, but it's also a very diverse, and also sometimes I don't want to say they don't get along, but they have different views on things, right? So of course, the generational aspect to it, and there's also people who are with different background, immigration status, and all of that. So what would you say are some of the misrepresentation or things that people don't realize about Korean American community, in your views?
So I think so one of the things, as my organization has been trying to, work to educate the broader mainstream, is about this idea of the Korean American community being a model minority community. I think for those of you are not familiar with that terminology, the model minority, of course, is saying, at least for the Korean Americans, they must be well-to-do, educated, they don't really need help and support and things like that. But in fact, if you look at the Korean American community, we are actually, as a community, we recently did a report on this, we are probably the most educated. I think there's about 55% of the Korean American community has a BA, and within the Asian American community, that's about 53%. So even among Asians, we're more educated than but in the national average, it's about 33%. So, but you would assume that, a very well-educated community must be doing economically well. And fairly, I mean, about $72,000 median income. This is based on 2018 data. That's kind of on average, and it's above the national average. But if you look at the Korean American community, it's actually in 2020, it's very bimodal. So what I mean by that is there are Korean Americans that are very well-to-do and highly educated, and there are many Korean Americans that are actually close to the poverty line. And just a couple of data points here. So in 2010, the national average for poverty rate was 11.3% in 2010. But in Korea, for Korean Americans, it was 11.8%. So the poverty rate for the Korean American community was higher than the national average. And then in 2018, because of economic growth and other things that had happened, 2018, it actually, Korean American community, the poverty went down to 7.8%, and the national average became 9.3%. So Korean Americans within that 8-year period actually improved in terms of its economic growth. But what's interesting is in 2018, for Korean Americans who are 65 and older, the poverty rate was 18.6%, right? And so, so poverty rate is correlated with age within the Korean American community. So there are pockets. I mean, there's a large pockets of Korean Americans that are not doing economically well, and but the general notion of Korean American is that, oh, they must all be doing well, so we don't need to provide services and community services from both our government and others. But in fact, there is a great need. And so one of the, I guess, myths we're trying to dispel, or misrepresentation, is that Korean Americans, there are challenges, there are needs. Of course, there are people who are doing very well, but we need to actively help to support many of those that are needed in the Korean American community. So,
yeah. So, for me, again, like, you know, in terms of like a civic engagement, again, like, you know, mainstream think of like an Asian American or Korean American doesn't need to be lead shot for the political engagement. So there's like an interesting research, like, you know, back in 2020 during the presidential election, more than 50% of the Asian American never reached out from any other campaign, because they do not. They think, you know, the campaign side or, you know, political side, you know, they think, you know, consider Korean Americans that doesn't interested in the politics, right? So those things, like, you know, probably one of the misrepresented like things. And also, these days I'm more think of like recent concern was as a Korean culture is getting spotlight in the Western culture in the United States. So there's a tendency people, you know, treat the Korea equal Korean Americans, right? So I have faced a lot of question with my the friends that says, like, you know, yeah, BTS is getting popular, Squid Game, those things, like, hey, like, you know, the K-pop, K-drama things, and does it help you to promote your community to like mainstream the U.S.? My answer is yes and no, but like, you know, that represent like, you know, the Korean, not the Korean Americans, right? So it doesn't explain the our identity as a Korean American. So that's still like, you know, these days, like, I think more, you know, how we can promote Korean Americans' identity instead of like, you know, just Korean like culture stuff.
Yeah, I mean, those are all really important points, and especially on the elderly poverty. It was really interesting that we see elderly poverty among Korean Americans in the United States, but also that's something South Korea is facing in South Korea as well. I don't know if there's a correlation, but I did think it was really important. And I think it's important for us to talk about these issues. And of course, we like to talk about the accomplishment and great things, but in order for us to improve on the areas that we all talked about, and also to make sure that we allocate the right resources in the areas that we need, I do really think these need to be more publicly discussed, as the points you mentioned. And there are a couple other things. I know, Abe, you mentioned the report, so I have a paper copy of your report for those of you interested in some CKA's report online. There are a couple other societal issues that I would like to discuss that maybe both of you probably have seen. So in addition to the ones that you discussed, mental health and also the public health care coverage was also something that I find interesting, and I'm sure you've worked on many of these. So what are some of your thoughts on those areas that still needs more support and resources for the Korean Americans?
So I think there's actually a more general question that the Korean American community needs, which is actually data, right? I think a lot of these things that we're talking about is that we assume that there's a lot of data available for the Korean American community, but there is actually not. And our report is really based on what was available. And there is a movement within here in Washington, D.C. among the Asian American community that, you know, there is a category called AANHPI, the Asian American Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community. And that represents, I don't know, 50 plus different Asian groups, right? And if you put Indian Americans and Hmong Americans and Korean Americans and all under one roof, and you presented data as one number of that, it really dilutes kind of the uniqueness of and the challenges that are within each of these communities. And so there is a movement to disaggregate all of these, to look at specific, whether it's Korean American, Chinese American, and other things like that. So these very important questions you're asking, like such as mental health and things like that, we know anecdotally that they're an issue, but we have no data to base it off, except a small data here and there. And the census is doing a better job and things like that. But there's a lot of work to be done on the data front. And so that's actually one kind of big point in terms of that needs to be done for a community. But in terms of mental health and things, absolutely. I mean, mental health resources, I think, and Mr. Song will probably have a perspective on this too, but mental health even is a stigma. To talk about mental health is a stigmatism, right? And so my dad's solution for mental health when I was growing up was get over it and get to it, right? But in fact, mental health, especially within the last few years, much showcase the importance of it, and so, and especially young people, and the folks that we work in civic communities during COVID, many of our leaders that we were talking to said the hotline for mental health, suicide, and support went through the roof, right? All these communities, domestic abuse, just all these different areas from New York to LA, and I think there's a greater recognition on the importance of it. And providing a safe space to talk about these things, but I think not enough. But again, we don't have data to support that, so or very little data to support it. So that's just my perspective on that.
So about that question, I totally agree with Dr. Kim's, because I mean the mental health crisis on the Korean American community is that's very important, because most of the first generation who has a language barrier, even though community provides a mental health program in English, they don't have a enough way to reach out them, right? Because of those language barrier. At the same time, as you mentioned, as your father, the Korean's mentality is if I reveal myself, I have a mental problem. That means I'm looking very weak person, right? So they have tendency to hide, not only for themselves but also their family members too, right? So, but again, every time we bring those community issue, which we need the governmental resource to provide direct service, the government side asks us data, right? How many people impacted this bill, this budget, and then what we can expect as a result of those program, right? But the reality is in Korean American doesn't have those specific data. That's definitely we need to improve, because of mostly the financial lack of financial resource to create our own data. So that's the challenging part. So
Yeah, those are all very important, especially the language side of things, right? So of course there are Korean Americans who are fluent in English, but there are also that are not, and because they're not taking advantage of the resources that are available, they are not only not counted for, but also they're not getting the benefits. So I think those are all important. And I want to go back to something Dr. Kim mentioned about the other communities. So what are your views, and how are Korean American community, its relationship with other, either the Asian American community or Latino community or African American community? Historically has been tensions and others, but as we've seen with during the pandemic, there was a lot of coalition building, and I'm hoping the relations will improve. But what have you observed, and where are we headed with our relationship with other community of ethnic groups?
So I believe the Seeker's report has those the dynamic what we Korean American group has with other community. So I will skip that part, but Dr. Kim will deal with that part. But in terms of also a civic engagement, we still a lot need to do to make the coalition, to cooperate with other ethnic cities. So we have very collective ethnic group. Is we have less we kind of especially the older generation reluctant to engage with other ethnic group. But in terms of civic engagement, engage in a legislative a process like, to make the coalition with other ethnic is really, really important. For example, the Adopted Cities Act, again, we are pursuing right now in the Capitol Hill. Without the coalition with Southern Baptist group, ERSC, we can make this much power, right? So I know like a Korean American is like very like bright, brilliant, and like very smart group, but still number is important too, right? We barely make like 0.5% of population. So without corporate work with the other ethnic group, I don't believe I can see the bright future of the Korean American community.
Mm-hmm. Actually, this is what Mr. Song says is actually an important point, even from a political standpoint, is that in the report, among all the Asian American groups, Koreans are the most isolated in terms of their engagement with other racial groups, whether it's African American or Latino or even other Asian American, and so which is both surprising and not surprising, right? And so based on surveys, and but if you look at the Korean American community, right, it's the 5th largest group within the AHPI community. But what's happening right now is that because the Korean American community has been growing in part because of immigration, right, coming from Korea and so forth. But immigration since the 70s and 80s have been in a sharp decline, right? And as we all know, Korean demographics in Korea is an issue too because of low birth rates. So less people are coming this way. And so, but relative to other Asian American communities, Korea is relatively starting to slow down, but other communities are rapidly growing, right? Like let's say Indian American or Chinese American. And so over time, Korean American community will no longer be the 5th largest in a decade or so. And what's important, especially in a society like the United States, you need coalitions. You need to work with other communities to ensure the protection of interests that are to the Korean American community. So those coalition building are absolutely important. But if we're growing smaller and smaller, it's very important that we start building those bridges now so that within 10, 15 years, we have the network, we have the community allies to ensure that Korean American community continues to be, policy interests we can work on with other communities, but also push forward. So again, there's a lot of work to be done, right, as you mentioned. And so I think those are important demographics as well as alliance issues moving forward. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to earlier. We mentioned a couple things earlier, but I want to switch gear to talk about Korean Americans in politics. Of course, we have 4 Korean Americans representing different districts in the U.S. Congress, and also many in the state and local level as well. But compared to other Asian American community, we're kind of on a late side of things in terms of having elected politicians in different levels. And I know in the past, the interest for politics, U.S. American politics, has been pretty low. And so what do you think there has been such a disinterest in getting involved in U.S. politics, and are things changing now?
So like for me, there's like 2 main reasons. So the first generation of a Korean American who immigrated here is like here is like 70s, 80s, 90s. Although like today is like we celebrate 120 years of Korean American immigration. But most of the immigration, like Korean American immigration, happened like in 70s, 80s, 90s, right? When they moved to here in the U.S., our motherland, the motherland's political environment was not really good. There was like the long time dictatorships, and then a lot of the corruption things, right? So among the first generation, like they have a tendency to think of the politics is like evil, or politics is kind of corrupted, right? That's like the prejudice, stereotyping they have. At the same time, like a language barrier, right? And also for the second generations, they I mean, these days the second generation are kind of different, but like, the first, second generation who were born here like 70s, 90s, they barely experience like, their parents engaging in like politics, right? Even simple voting, right? We have like, the annual conference for the civic engagement 2 nights, 3 days, like, most the first question I ask our attendees, like, do you know your Congress member? Or, do you know who is your state legislative? I can say, regardless of their education level, still less than half, like more than half of them, like don't know who they represent, their community. So that's the like, the main reason I believe, Korea is a relatively, that does not interest in the politics. But again, generation difference, like in the second generation, 1.5 generation, who experienced, even the first generation, who experienced like an LA riot, right? Their, the perspective on the civic engagement, the politics is slightly changed. Like a lot the organization like us promote like Korean Americans civic engagement starting from that time after LA riot. And then, the young generation who has parents like, the experience like, those, the LA riot crisis, they're more educated in terms of like in the civic engagement. But yeah, community slowly change. My organization is like, the evidence of like a community that changes. So, but still, we need to, a lot to need to make down, like, we had to do something, to improve our civic engagement level. Yeah.
Well, I think with this next younger generation, things are changing, and it's very actually encouraging. And there's a lot of young people getting involved in politics as well as supporting. And as Mr. Song mentioned, I mean, just looking at the congressional staffers, for example, imagining that many Korean American staffers just supporting. And these are the future people who will be political appointments for future administrations. But also people who are involved in state and local politics as well. I mean, you have all the data for that, but it's just, there's just a tremendous amount of energy within the young people. And I think that like you said, there's room for improvement and change. And my organization as well was established in 2011, but we were all part of the LA riots generation, and we all lived through that. And I think historians call LA riots kind of the turning point for the Korean American community, when Korean Americans started to call themselves Korean Americans, right? And so, and those who founded my organization really saw that this is what happens to a community when they have no political representation, no media representation, isolated, and face, really have no friends, right? And the limitations of that. And we had to get more civically engaged, more politically involved, more actively knowing how to engage with the media and so forth. And so both of our organizations and many others came out of that era, and that was an important event. And unfortunately, sometimes crisis creates creates change. But I think now things are getting better. It could go a lot faster, yes. But I think just something like even just getting our parents to vote is important. But being more engaged, donating to campaigns, and then running for office are all important part of this. So, yeah.
Right. So my mom became a naturalized U.S. citizen not too long ago, and I took her to voting. And she was shocked by how many questions she was asked during the ballot, which is true, because she thought she could just go and vote for one person. But there are a lot of different people that you have to pick, and also the things that are available in different languages. Not all states or have it. And I just want to highlight the KAGC's great report. They put out an annual report on Korean American policy priorities and population data. And I was really struck by only 4 states have voter registration form available in Korean. Actually, 5 states. And there are only a couple counties and then across the country that have ballots available in Korean. So the language definitely is one of the barriers that prevent people from, that makes things harder for Korean Americans to vote. But I think also something other Korean Americans might think is, my votes don't matter, is probably one of the things that they think in terms of not being involved. For example, they might feel like my votes wouldn't change my day-to-day life. But I know you have a list of different legislations that would actually impact Korean Americans. So if you don't mind, just highlight a couple of them. So you mentioned some of them. So the adoptee rights to citizenship, and there's also the immigration, obviously, that affects Korean Americans in the United States. Also the diversity-related legislation as well. And then the voting rights, and of course there's one section on the U.S. Korea relations and how the legislation related to U.S. Korea affects Korean Americans, actually. So anything you would like to add to all the policies that are important to the Korean American
Actually,
community?
dealing with the policy, all the policies we're dealing with, we always try to go to bipartisan policies, because community itself is a very small community. At the same time, community has a very divided perspective on their the political ideology. Maybe from the Korean history, our Korean peninsula's history, but more than policy-wise, I believe that our engagement will show our presence at those decision-making process are important, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the local area, easily you can get access, the town hall meeting and your township, right? You can barely see the Korean Americans. Even just the HOA meeting, the Koreans just have tendency, whatever they make a decision, we follow it, right? So I mean, we try to, frankly speaking, those are policies our reasoning to engage the legislative process, but our main process, our main goal is show our presence in the Capitol Hill or local government. Mm-hmm. And also, by the way, if your mom needs any language assistance or a question about the voting election, we KGC provide the both language election guide every election season. You can easily get access through the website. And also we have the voter hotline both in English and Korean. So just let her know our phone number, and then you don't have to struggling explain everything. So.
Great, those are great resources. I'm sure many Korean Americans will definitely find that interesting and on their website. Don't forget to visit both KGC and also CKA for different resources. So I want to take a step back and talk about the U.S. Korea relations as a whole. And of course, at KEI, we focus on promoting dialogue and understanding between two countries. And we really believe Korean Americans have a role in the broader U.S. Korea relations. So what are your personal views on the roles of Korean Americans in the U.S. Korea relation as a whole, as in abroad?
Well, I think there's a couple of different roles, and I think one is certainly as a Korean American community, we want a strong U.S. Korea alliance, and that's within our interest as a community because our families are there, our heritage is there. But I think there's but we also know that they're not completely the same either, right? And so. But as Korean Americans, it is within our interest, and we want to support our U.S. government to continue that strong relationship. So we can tell our representatives we want a strong U.S. Korea relations. So I think that's an important way to get involved. Certainly public service and shaping policies, just informing our leadership and so forth. But also, I think one of the things that at CK we've been trying to help with is also with with the increase of, for example, Korean companies coming to the United States, right? FDI and so forth coming in. Many Korean companies, many Korean organizations, not familiar with local politics, right? With state level politics, need a bridge. And oftentimes Korean American community can serve that. Not all Korean American communities community members, but some Korean, who have an understanding of both and can help facilitate that as well. And then there's some examples of how the Korean American community were involved in helping to support that. But I think Korean American community can do often serve as a bridge, not only at the most highest levels of government, but also even at the local level, to be an important bridge in that. So.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because each of us Korean Americans, either you want or not, we are kind of individual ambassador, between the U.S. mainstream and the Korean American community, even U.S. Korea relations. So so our role is really important. I mean, we can easily find the example from even the Congress. Congressman Young Kim. She her first term last session 117th. She's only a first term Congress member, but she's a most important figures who are dealing with the U.S. Korea relations in the Foreign Affairs Committee in Republican side, right? So, I mean, I believe that's our our fate destiny, to be the individual ambassador, the bridging the gap between the Korean American community and the U.S. mainstream and my motherland and my land, the U.S. So
Right, and especially on the FDI, obviously we're seeing a lot of activities and investment in Georgia and Texas, and for those companies, for their longevity of the company, they really need to learn the local community and be involved, and I think that's an important role for Korean Americans as well. And also, I really like your point about the everyday ambassador, because for people who are not familiar with Korea as a country, their perception of the country will depend on maybe a Korean American that they met, and the Korean American friend that takes you to a Korean restaurant or gets you exposed to different cultures. So I think that definitely, whether we realize it or not, we are playing a little bit a role in perception of the country. And so I think that's really important. Next, I want to talk about mentorship. So I know within the Korean American community and also other places as well, mentoring the next generation is very important. And I know both of your organizations dedicate a lot of resources in educating and helping the next generation of Korean Americans. So what is your personal and also organization's vision or kind of philosophy of what you would like the next generation to do?
Our organization is compared with the CCAR is a small organization, and we really dedicate just the activity, any civic engagement activity, the Congress, Capitol, and also we focus on program local level with our partner organization. But we really try to create the support system for Korean Americans who want to join the public sector. I mean even the second generation, my generation, they don't have any resource, to reach out the public sector, so that they just stay with just one of the Asian American the group, or individually reach out some the mentor figure, to get some position or work in the certain sector. So the KGs try to create a lot of the opportunity that, especially for the young kids, get especially the internship at the Congress or the federal government. So that's all our short term, and also a long term goal. And then we grew up with tiger moms, right? Our parents forced us to be the medical doctor, lawyer, pharmacist, those the area, not you can be the the work at the public sector, but I want to bring the more Korean people at the public sector. Just think about it, we have if we have more people in the public sector, just for the DC, I mean they represent the more Korean American community, and then they will be, each of them also the everyday the ambassador for the U.S. Korea relations, right? So that's still our organization goal for the next generation.
For us, actually, this very question is we're very passionate about this as an organization. I think as a Korean American organization, one of our mission is leadership development, and our general philosophy is how do we train creators and builders and innovators within the Korean American community. And what I mean by that is, for us, there's an understanding, and kind of a multi-generational understanding of this, where, our parents and our grandparents came into the United States as immigrants, and they came into a system, and they all taught us as children when we're growing up, you need to be highly educated, because being a professional will help you get to the top of the system, right? And so we all went to great schools and stuff like that, and we became professionals, and we reached, leadership, management, executives, so forth. But realize as a community, and this is general within the Asian American, that there are limits to that. There are, like sometimes they call it bamboo ceilings, right, and things like that. And what's interesting is that we're all kind of realizing that at the same time, kind of in this generation currently. And so, as Korean Americans, as Asian Americans, what we need to do for our next generation is really to help train our young people and our next generation to be creative, to be idea makers, to be entrepreneurial. And what I mean by that is that our parents pushed us to be lawyers, doctors, kind of the traditional professions. But we need more Korean Americans in media, in the arts, in entrepreneurship, in academia, in technology, in all these areas where it's really about innovation and creative. And so rather than trying to get to the top of a system, we are actually becoming the authors of the future system. And so that's kind of where, as an organization, we are pushing people, and that's what we celebrate there are people, Korean Americans, who have become pioneers in media, art, and other places like that, because in the future, they will be the idea makers, right? And so in order to have representation, in order to be leaders, we have to be at the table, we have to be contributors, and we have to be shaping the future. And we are contributing to the tapestry of what makes the United States dynamic and wonderful and rich. And so through our leadership program is how do we train our young people to think, whether they're in the public sector or whether in the private sector, to think in those creative and break out of molds and to think that way. And also utilizing mentors like Mr. Song and others and people to come back and share their experiences, what they've learned, and then from there they can stand on our shoulders to move forward even to greater heights, because we stood on the shoulders of our parents' generation, right, who have come. And so we've learned, we've changed, and we're passing on that wisdom to the next generation. Hopefully they'll take that wisdom and even grow even further. So that's the philosophy of our leadership development, and what we need for the next generation, for our Korean American community, to not only to thrive and to be leaders within this multicultural society we call the United States. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And both organizations play such a critical role in educating and mentoring Korean Americans. And mentorship is such an important concept because, of course, we have our parents that we can ask questions from, but it's definitely different than having someone in the profession that they want to go into and seeing someone who that look like them have done the job and the career that they have, and also someone for them to ask questions about. So I'm sure everyone that has gone through the mentorship and internship and such through the KGC and CKA, and I'm sure they're very grateful for your leadership and your support, and I'm sure they are also looking forward to giving back to the community. So we're getting close to the end of our program, and I do want to end on a positive note. Yes, we talked about the challenges that we're having, but what would you say are some of the things that you hope to see in, let's say, next 10 or 20 years?
For me, the more, we previously mentioned about the very divided diversity of a Korean American dynamics among Korean Americans groups, right? Because we have first generation who came here like 70s, 80s, 90s. Other first generation like me after 2000, right? Those are tours identity is totally different. And then the second generation, like born in here like 70s, 80s. Second generation, our like junior step area, like born in like after 2000, their identity is totally different. But that's why the Korean Americans are described as very like the divided group. But I believe those interrelation work is happen already because just think about it like today is like a KEI like the panel discussion. When I started this job like 11 years ago, this kind of opportunity we didn't have much because like we both have like the same goal, but the Dr. Kim is more like engaged with the second generation, right? And then I more the engaging in the first generation groups. But now like we sit together, talk about like Korean Americans' future, what's the challenge, how we can make a better community. So I hope to see like within the 10 or 20 years more integrated like the community and strong community, which can like make the strong voice for our interests and right in the United States. Yeah.
So in 10 and 20 years, I think, Mr. Song's point, I think something that we and other organizations are doing is trying to change the Korean American culture, which is to be, and let's be frank and transparent, we're divisive at times. And so what we're trying to do is change that so that Korean Americans are working together better, intergenerationally, as well as with other communities. So I hope to see cultural change. And secondly, I hope to see, why not, Korean American President of the United States,
Why not?
So we have 4 House of Representatives. We need a senator, we need a governor, we need cabinet officials, and we need a president. So if you haven't, in 20 years, you can mark Abe Kim predicted that the KEI in 20. But in all seriousness, we have that potential as a community.
That's true.
And we have the ability to come together. Of course, that Korean American president of the United States, a candidate, has to be more than just about the Korean American. It has to be more broadly, and really someone who can bring together a wide group of people and have that energy and that dynamism. And so I think, why not? Why not think like that? So.
You heard it here, folks. Why not? Well, so today, obviously is the Korean American Day, and just because it's the end of Korean American Day doesn't mean we're no longer Korean Americans, or these issues that we've discussed will go away anytime soon. So I hope we will continue this dialogue and discussion on things that we can improve for the future generation. And I really appreciate Dr. Kim and Mr. Song for being part of our KEI's Korean American Day. I couldn't think of any better people to discuss, have discussed all the important issues that we did today. And for those of you who are here and also watching online, don't forget to support CKA and KAGC and all the resources and the report that I mentioned. They are available on the YouTube chat and also on their website as well. And of course, I can't forget KEI. If you're interested in learning more about U.S. Korea relations and the policies that are involved, you can always follow us on KEI's website. With that, I want to thank the speakers today, and also Master Stevens for the leadership and support, and also everyone at KEI staff and interns who made this event possible, and so I really appreciate that. And for everyone who's here on Friday, thank you so much for coming, and for everyone online watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Happy Korean American Day, and we'll see you next year.
Thank you.